And the Old Testament was written over 500 years, and it was written by several different sources of writers. As time moved on, minds evolved, thinking changed, and so new writers came in, and they conceived of a different type God. They characterized God as being something other than what it was previously stated for in the Bible. Now, the original God was a God that was human, a God that was a man, but had superhuman powers. And this was by what they call the J writers. And the J writers were named J writers because it was Yahweh was the name they used for God, spelled with the J. Well, after a while, a couple hundred years, the E writers came into being. And they held that God was a transcendent being, way beyond humanity, and that God was a God to be feared and a God to be obeyed, and a God that would punish us if we didn't do what that God wanted. And they were called the E writers because they called that God Elohim. Well, this went on for another 100 years or so, and then we have the P writers that come into place. And the P writers are the priestly writers. Now, I find it very interesting that the first writers were named after the name they gave God, but when it comes to the P writers, they named themselves after themselves. It was the priests that wrote the text. And everything changed at this point in time. With the P writers, God became unapproachable. God became unmerciful. God became something way beyond the average person's ability to connect with or reach with. They had to go through the priests. And this is where God became a commercial opportunity. And the priests were the intermediary. And if you wanted to be saved, if you wanted to escape God's wrath, you had to do what the priest said. You had to obey their dictates and their orders. So this went on for another 500 years until Jesus comes on the scene. And Jesus comes on the scene and he says, wait a minute. God is not out there, God is in here. God is not angry, God is not wrathful, God is not judging, God is loving. God is available to all people at all times. You don't have to be Jewish. You can be a pagan. You can be a Gentile. It doesn't make any difference. God lives within the heart of all people. And as we go through the New Testament, we find several phrases where it says God is within, God is it all. If you live in God, you live in love. If you live in love, God lives in you. There's all these references that God is within. And this was moving perfectly because God became more of a personal God than a far-off, revengeful God. Well, when Jesus left, the very church that was established upon his ministry began to lose control of the people. The priests began to get worried. So they reverted back to the one God out there that was unapproachable, and that the priests were the intermediary to get to God. Now, saying all that, it's very interesting that God has gone through all these changes, but we can see two things are common. One is people have always turned to God for needs that they can't seem to fulfill themselves. And the second thing is that God, the concept, the definition, the idea, has continually evolved as human beings have evolved. As times change, our minds change, and we have higher insights of what can be. Now, the current concept that we find in most religions of God is 3,000 years old. And stop and think about that for just one moment. We don't take care of physical injuries or illnesses the same way we did 3,000 years ago. We don't use the same tools or the same methods that we did 3,000 years ago. We don't think the way we did 3,000 years ago. We don't view our universe, our world, ourselves the way we did 3,000 years ago. Yet still we are stuck with this 3,000-year-old concept of God as being somebody out there. And one of the problems that we run into is that we try to conceptualize God in a three-dimensional world through our five senses. And God is not of the three-dimensional world. God cannot be discovered by our five senses. God is beyond that. God is, if you will, in a fourth dimension that goes beyond the senses. Scientists tell us that there are many different dimensions to this earthly world than the three that we live in. Quantum physicists tell us that we have more senses in our body to be discovered than just the five that we currently use. So when we turn to God to try to find a concept or an idea or a model of God that doesn't offend our senses, that doesn't insult our common sense, we have to go beyond the three-dimensional world. Now I have Pam, come up here for a second. I have a present for you. And I just want to make a point. You don't have stage fright, do you? No? Okay. I have a present for you. Go ahead and open it up. What's in there? Nothing. Nothing in there. Can't feel anything, can't see anything, can't smell anything. Nothing in there. Everybody agree? But there is something in here. It's air. There's air in here. But air goes beyond our five senses. We can't sense air unless there's a strong wind. We can't smell air, we can't see air, we can't hear air. And the point is, you can keep this lovely box of air if you'd like. You give it to your dad for Father's Day. God knows we all need air. You use that air. But anyway, the point is, it's the same thing with spirit. God is spirit. And we can't see spirit, we can't hear spirit, we can't smell spirit or taste spirit. We can't do anything with spirit because it's beyond our five senses, just like air. Yet every person in here has complete trust that there is air. We depend on air for our very life, for our breath, even though it is totally invisible and outside our realm of sensing. So we have to move to that same kind of trust when it comes to spirit. God is not an entity or a deity or something out there or an individual. God is spirit, and spirit is everywhere present, just like air is everywhere present, but much, much, much more. Air gives us what we need to survive and to live. But spirit gives us much, much more. It's what we need to thrive, to be strong, to have power, to have love. Spirit is very life force itself. Spirit is the love within you. If you go to the doctor or take any kind of test and say, tell me how much love I have, the doctor's going to say, you don't have any. I can't see it. I can't feel it. You have no love, but you know it's there. You know that you have love within you. You have a power within you that is much, much greater than your bodily power. It's your spiritual power that enables you to make it through the most difficult of times. You have a wisdom within you, and that wisdom right now is directing your body and your cells and the molecules to do over 1 million things in this very second just to keep your entire body running. That's an incredible wisdom. If we can't see it, we just trust that it is there. It's the same thing with spirit as it is with air. We have to move beyond the three-dimensional world. We have to move beyond our five senses. We have to trust that it is there. It is within us. It is our life force. And if we turn to it, it will give us what we need. Instead of praying to somebody out there to fill our needs that we can't fill ourselves, we now turn within and we have instant fulfillment if we trust and we believe in that God. See, it's time for us to evolve way beyond that 3,000-year-old concept of God and claim our God, the God within, the God of love, the God of life. It does God an injustice. It does us an injustice. It denies us. It denigrates us to still believe that God is out there watching down on us, ready to punish us. That is a myth, and it's time to be put to bed or to be viewed as a myth and enjoyed. But when it comes to the God of our body, the God of our spirit, it's time to embrace that and know that it is there every single moment of your life. It was there before you came into this world. It will be there when you leave this world. It is you. It is in you. It is through you. It is your provider for everything you need to make it through the most difficult times. So as we go into meditation this morning, we are going to move to a place beyond the three-dimensional world, beyond our five senses, and explore God in a whole different way, an internal God that we can embrace and that we can have a relationship with, where we become one with God rather than separate from God.